So what I would like to do is to invite our panellists to respond. It's rather a tall order, but given the timetable and the fact that we have interpretation until 1 o'clock, I would ask each of you to try to discipline your response, which won't include everything, I'm sure, to 5 minutes, which is already about 3 minutes longer than the average speech of an MEP in the European Parliament. Donc, je tourne premièrement avec...
So, I turn first to Pierre Lemerès. 5 minutes, please, as fast as you can. You win the Olympic Games and win the gold medal in communication.
But, premièrement...
Well, firstly, I'd like to respond to a comment that was made by a member, but also by the young Polish lady at the back, about an introduction that I made. I said that we know that the role of school and education is plural. I would just point this out again. I was a director of youth and sport. I created the European Service. I recently made a recommendation that was followed by ministers to ensure that all skills acquired outside of school were actually valued, and this was a system implemented in 2010. So please don't be mistaken. This is all important, but the main priority at the moment is unemployment for young people. That's really the message. But nonetheless, these skills are good for the labour market, but also good for being a good citizen. Languages, there's no contradiction there. But if you have to make a choice, if you have to choose one sector, perhaps you could look at a sector where they're looking for IT skills or for nurses, or look for young people who are going to be working in ecology, because we know that these are sectors where there are shortcomings in Europe. If you're choosing a language, perhaps choose the language that will provide you with the most opportunities on the labour market. Now on the key skills. Obviously these are essential. I've talked about them already, and they're the basis for everything. And it goes back to what I said about funding. Governments, ministers fund education, but so do other people. Private individuals can fund education. Everyone has to think about what their priorities are. Personally speaking, this is not a Commission position, it's, in my personal opinion, the main priority for funding through public authorities has to be nursery school, primary school and secondary. That's where we should really have the package, because that's what really leads to social inclusion and better opportunities for all. And that's really the role of what government should be doing. On vocational training, I talked about that myself as well, but I just go back to what the first speaker said on the German model. What's interesting in the dual model in Germany and in other countries as well is that there's no real boundary between the business world and the educational world. There's a natural link. Also, there are no boundaries, or certainly not as many boundaries, between universities and the world of work, because there are graduands and people who are kind of in the in-between phase, and it's good to blur these boundaries. On teachers now, it's now the first time that the European Union has been sending out such a strong message to member states about the need for teacher training. I wasn't arguing in favour of early retirement. All I was saying is that there will be a lot of turnover in primary and secondary school teachers in the next few years. That's been proved by demographic trends. And so we have to take this opportunity to train these new teachers correctly. On gender-related issues, a lot of work still needs to be done. if you look at early school leavers, they're mainly male. More and more women are going to university, but not always in the sectors, in the areas that are needed. And not just in education, but in all professions. Some of them are very focused on one gender or another. And migratory flows are important here and are important for education. The European labour market is not all that flexible, not all that fluid. It's somewhere in the region of 5%. Perhaps Brussels doesn't reflect reality elsewhere, but Brussels isn't really like the rest of Europe. But in villages, in your cities, there is very little flexibility. However, there is mobility in highly qualified people going outside of Europe. So we need Europe to offer jobs, and it's small and medium-sized enterprises who are going to provide new and innovative jobs. That's not really my portfolio, but I think it's something that does link up to this. And then finally, I'd just like to talk about Erasmus. You know that we have a program called Erasmus for All, and that means a lot. It means Erasmus for more students. It means Erasmus for apprentices. It means Erasmus in the voluntary sector. It means learning mobility. You know that we have a 70% higher budget. That's huge in terms of the budget, but very little in terms of actual needs. I'd like to thank the Parliament and Rapporteur Doris Pack for her support for that programme. I think in February, March, we'll be talking about this with heads of state, and hopefully that's when we'll see Erasmus for All really take hold. Thank you for that, Pierre. Thank you for your presentation, and thank you for your presence with us this morning. Peter.
Thank you very much. I would like to speak about empowerment, because I think that's the basis of everything. That's the basis of what we are trying to do in youth organizations, empower young people to give them the chance to make an informed choice. Because all the things that were mentioned by our Polish colleagues, by our Bulgarian colleagues, all the system in which you're in, all the necessities, all the needs of the society come down to a choice of an individual. And the choice of an individual in a free country, in a free continent like Europe, needs to be his or her choice first and foremost. But to be able to make that choice, young people need to be informed properly. That's when it comes to employment and career planning. You need to have career orientation services that enable you this. We have seen from our experience, from our youth organizations that are working on the ground, that they have identified that career orientation is a problem because there's not enough information, and the world is changing so rapidly that 5 years ago, the most sought of jobs today haven't even been created or known of 5 years ago. So how do you expect, when I remember myself, when I was moving from high school to studying, the only thing available to me was a person working in one person for the entire school of 200 kids, and a big yellow book in which I could see what is on offer in Slovenia. I wasn't even given the opportunity to know about options 40 kilometers away from my home, which is Graz in Austria. So those kind of things are the basic needs, and that's what sometimes our youth organizations try to do to fill the gap in what is needed. So sometimes it's not really about the very big questions. When it comes to individual level, it's about the small question of one person can decide for him or herself. Of course, the responsibility of politicians, the decision makers of the society at large, is to identify what is the need, is to identify the gaps and cater for them or try to propose solutions for them. But trickling that down to the individual, I do not want to force young people to become plumbers or technicians just because that's what the society needs. But I want them to be aware of those needs so that they can decide for themselves if they wish to continue studying political science, which might be futile in the sense of not necessarily getting a job. But one thing that we are also missing is the discrepancy between what used to be the one job for life and what was mentioned, the portfolio careers, because we as younger generation, as Natalia was mentioning, we are willing to change, we are willing to adapt, we are doing that constantly, but still we are not getting something for it, in a sense, if you look at the current situation, because it's not recognized what we do. I'm in the same situation as Fatma and myself. I've been active for 10 years, and still when I go to Slovenia somewhere and I can speak perfect German, but they will ask me as an employer to first give them a certificate that I actually speak German instead of just trying to engage in a conversation. So it's those kind of things that we need to address first and foremost. And it's in terms of what the Youth Forum has been doing and what we are focusing on is the 2 points that were mentioned by my Bulgarian colleague and by Fatma. By my Bulgarian colleague, our next work plan for the 2 years is focused on mobility, is focused on allowing visa liberalization and residence permits questions that tackle both EU citizens and non-EU citizens alike. That's something we want to work on. We know the Commission is going to tackle, even though it postponed it a bit, their directive on visa and permits living in the EU. That's a crucial issue if we want to encourage mobility. And as I said in the past, we believe that there should be no restrictions for EU citizens and everybody should be treated equally. When it comes to non-formal education, that's something that was very core of our work, because Erasmus for All is a nice proposal in terms of the objectives of mobility, in terms of the additional funding, but in terms of the name and in terms of the scope, it focuses on higher education students, which means what Marta was mentioning, an elite. And that's not what we want. What we want is opportunities for all, and therefore we are much in favor of the Parliament's suggestion on Yes Europe, youth education, sport, because there are different means of achieving the same objectives. And as Marta was correctly pointing out in terms of how important it is to understand the notions, what is behind the name. Erasmus for All might have been a great idea by someone, but when you try to explain that, people will look at it from a very different point of view. So it's important to understand the sensibilities. And the same goes for the gender question. I mean, we speak about young people because that's an age group that we focus on, and we see that we treat in our activities everyone equally without looking at it from this perspective or that perspective, but we are very much aware that there are specific needs, the same way that young people have specific needs, the same way young mothers have specific needs. I had the experience within our board, there was a young mother, and what that meant for us as a youth organization, what it meant for a volunteer, what it meant to be able to travel or not with a baby around. And all these things are important questions that should be continuously addressed. But that's all from my side. Thank you very much.
Peter, thank you so much. And again, we greatly appreciate your contribution and your presence today. Marta, you have the last word on the panel.
Well, very briefly, just a couple of questions that came out. First of all, the issue of language. I don't remember this lady's name. I used the word exile because that's how I wanted to represent the problem. It's because we don't want to go. We want to stay in our society to repay what's been spent on educating us. Also, someone said that teachers retire too early. Well, I give classes in a university. I would say that after 30, 40 years, people are burnt out. Worse than a child who doesn't want to go to school is a teacher who doesn't want to go to school. Being a teacher is a very difficult profession. So people who no longer want to go and teach should leave space, should move over to young people who are trained to educate and who want and who respect this globalized, interconnected world. Thirdly, is full employment possible, we have to ask. Is that possible in a capitalist society where we have competition between commercial powers, between commercial and human rights interests? Is full employment possible when people, instead of investing in society, are often going investing in a kind of casino, financial investments? The problem is that we're not necessarily asking for employment. We're asking for rights. We're asking for rights to new types of employment. Perhaps it's part-time work, perhaps it's short-term work, perhaps it's involuntary work. Because the only way I can have dignity is through the income guaranteed by my job. That's what will give me my dignity. I don't want to have a job which won't give me this dignity and where I'll feel insecure. On gender, I mean, I could talk to you all afternoon about this. It's true that women do occupy a slightly different place in the economic system. We are more vulnerable in terms of access, in terms of payment, promotion. And as many of you know, austerity measures have particular impact on women because the cuts are mainly from largely feminine sectors, the public sector. Often we lose our job first. We lose our job, we lose our income, and there's no other income in the house. Often young women as well have a slightly different type of precarity. When I was talking about youth before, it was particular reference to the female body. Often it's women who are seen as, you know, we have to be always available, always with a smile on our faces, willing to do anything. It's often quite a sexualized image. And this is also important on top of whatever qualifications we may have. The Polish lady asked about, well, when we young people, when we're fighting for politics, we're not just fighting. We're looking for politics because that's how solutions will come about. Often the discourse that comes out is quite frightening. It can be threatening, but this is what we need. We need to have a rupture with what went before, but that's how we'll find the solution. Thank you.
Marta, thank you very much indeed. A good deal of what we've discussed this morning, I think, has necessarily been in what the economists call the supply side of the economy. And there's no doubt that the many things we've heard are a necessary part of responding to the crisis. I've little doubt that until we do something at a European level to repair the demand side of the economy, that we will be haunted by this debate. And unhappily, non-Europe expresses itself more loudly than a real Europe on the question of the demand side of this equation. And I think for the younger generation, their voice and our voice has to be heard much more in that space, in addition to all of the necessary complementarity which we will find on supply side. It's my pleasure now to draw this event to a close, to turn to Brigitte Langenhagen, who inspired this morning in terms of her proposition on our board. And Brigitte, I turn to you now to close this seminar out.
Thank you very much, Pat. I'd like to thank all of you on behalf of the Former Members Association that organised the meeting. I'd like to thank you to everyone who's spoken from the floor. I'd also like to thank the speakers, the panellists. You've also shown a great deal of discipline because you've all stayed here in the room. That's very unusual. That's my experience anyway. My conclusion then is that we have taken one another seriously this morning, and you can rest assured that it will remain that way on our side, and I hope you have got that message. Now, there was one thing that I liked very much, and that was about culture. It's not just about museums and libraries or other institutions, but it's much more a question of someone's identity, identifying within the society in which we live. It's really about what the society needs to do, what the society is saying. I think we've said a lot about that today, and I think we can learn a lot from what's been said. It's very important to see how a society expresses itself. Now, obviously, we've got to do some homework, and I hope that we can continue dialogue with the former Members Association. And obviously, well, the speaker kindly thanks the interpreters. Thank you. Because it is difficult also to understand all the different people's mentalities. That's also what translation is about. So this is Europe in its plurality. Let's continue to work on it and continue to meet together like this. So thank you very much and all the best to you.